Remember 1-2 Switch? Of course you don't. You have severe brain trauma from the accident. This was a launch title for the Switch. The game was to showcase what the system was capable of by having a bunch of smaller games within that utilized the Joy-Cons in a variety of different ways. It was also released for $50 and was not a pack-in title. I know Nintendo was in a pretty bad spot at the time and really needed all the money they could scrounge up, but surely they could have packed this in with the system, right? The last two Nintendo consoles had pack-in titles with Wii Sports and Nintendo Land. Why stop here? And yeah, I know. In Japan, Wii Sports wasn't a pack-in game, and that with the Wii U, only the black Wii U came with Nintendo Land for a more expensive price compared to the white Wii U. Later down the line, when the Wii U was floundering like a fish having a seizure while on crack, they got rid of the cheaper Wii U, making the black Wii U the only option, and then lowering its price from $350 to $300. Perhaps Nintendo believed that having multiple SKUs of a console at different prices at launch, with no obvious differences between them, was too confusing for the average consumer. So for the Switch, they just had one version to buy here, and it was just the one without the game by default. That's the only reason I can think of on why it wasn't a pack-in title. Despite being available since day one of the console's life, it only sold about 3.7 million units. I know that's not like a low number. It still made a profit for Nintendo, but honestly, it's a lot lower than I was expecting. Still sold better than ARMS. Now I'm sad. Did you know that ARMS was going to get a graphic novel headed by Ian Flynn? Yes, that Ian Flynn, the guy who's been writing Sonic comics for over a decade now, and then Nintendo canceled it. Now I'm pissed! Anyway, it's March, meaning that it's been 8 years since this game was released, and it's still at $50. This will be especially interesting for me since I've never played this game before. I was in high school when this was released, so I didn't have much money, and by the time I did get a job, I was way more interested in other games. In fact, the copy I own here isn't even mine, it's my siblings, who had this game gifted to them by a coworker. So with all that, let's take a look inside and see what I've been missing. It's plastic. The presentation of this game is very different for Nintendo. It opts to use a bunch of live action footage to show off how the games are played, which I think is smart. This is the casual, fun for the whole family kind of game, which of course includes people who don't play video games very often. So what a better way to teach them than having actual people demonstrating it themselves. They have these actors wearing these silly costumes and acting as cheesy as possible. It's cute. And then they shoved a couple of them in these sweaty gorilla suits. The poor bastards. The overall UI is something I'm starting to become familiar with. Without looking it up, I was able to tell that this was made by the same team that made Ring Fit Adventure and Game Builder's Garage. And then I did look it up, and I was right. Production Group number 4. It was the font that gave it away. I will say, the menu is very simplistic. When you want to select the game, you simply push the Joy-Con left to right until you reach the game you want, and then you leave it on screen for a couple seconds, and then the game will start. It's so simplistic and bare bones, I can't even find an option menu. I suppose it makes it very easy to pop in and play real fast, since it is a party game. Don't want people standing around for too long doing nothing. The big idea with this game is that you don't need to look at the screen to play. You look at what your opponent is doing, and you either listen for sound cues of the game, the vibrations of the Joy-Con, or react to what your opponent is doing. There's only one game in here that you had to actively look at the screen, and it's this treasure one. All other games, you look at your opponent. I admit, that's a pretty interesting idea. It kind of reminds me a lot of that one game from Wii Party where you need to hide the Wii remotes around the house, and then everyone else has to go try to find them. It was really cool. This game really doesn't have anything nearly on that same level. All these games are super simplistic. You do one thing and one thing only. Like Quick Draw, it's the classic reaction game where when the guy says fire, you try to shoot your opponent before they shoot you. This is basically that one minigame from Kirby's Adventure. It even has the same name, Quick Draw. And yeah, I know, Kirby didn't invent the game, but still, I thought it was funny. Shut the fuck up. Table tennis, rally a ball back and forth. This one you're not supposed to look at the screen, but I swear it's impossible otherwise. Since the person I was playing with and I just could not get the timing down without a little bit of guidance first. I actually think that's kind of a big issue overall. When you're looking at each other, you end up trying to fill the blanks with your own imagination. Take Sword Fight, for example. The idea is that you swing at each other and try to get hits, but the opponent can also block your swings. Thing is, there's no actual swords. So when I swing down and they block, it's not like I'm gonna actually recoil. But also, since I'm not looking at any characters, I can't even see a character recoil like in Wii Sports Swordplay. I just have to listen to the sound that indicates it's been blocked. It's like playing a game where your own brain has really bad rollback netcode. I think these games where you and your opponent directly interact just don't work, like at all. It's confusing and not fun. Swordplay is the worst, but Samurai kind of suffers from a similar issue. One person holds a Joy-Con above their head and swings down, while the other person tries to catch it. Thing is, when I swing down, the other person is always going to be delayed with the catch. Like, if this was real life, I totally would have sliced their head open. Of course, the game is lenient. If I swing down and they catch it half a second later, the game's going to say that they caught it, which is understandable, but it does make it where winning and failing doesn't particularly feel consistent. There's always a delay to their catch, so how delayed they have to be is something that's just ultimately up for the game to decide. I think the games that have players doing independent actions just generally work better, like beach flags. You're just trying to run faster than your opponent by shaking it faster than they are. Or signal flags, which is actually my favorite of these games. You have to point the Joy-Con in the direction the lady yells out, but there's a twist. If the man yells out a direction, you gotta do the opposite of what he says. So they're constantly switching back and forth, and it can really bend your mind trying to go in the right direction. I enjoyed it quite a lot. Boxing Gym is similar in that regard, but just without the mindfuckery. It's more straightforward. If they say punch in a direction, you punch in that direction, with no trickery involved whatsoever. These are the ones that I enjoy the most, except for Zen. You have to hold a position perfectly still for a long period of time, and it hurts my body, but that's less the game's fault and more mine for neglecting my exercises like I do my son. And then you get the games that kind of use like a variety of components to tally your score to see who wins. What I mean is, like, unlike in Shave, where the whole idea is simple, the first person to shave their face wins, or Plate Spin, don't drop the plate, these ones use a point system that looks into multiple areas and tries to calculate a score based on that. Like an air guitar, you strum an invisible guitar, and at the end they judge you based on your rhythm and your performance. It tallies those two things up, and the person with the most points win. Here's the issue. What the hell does performance mean? Like, who the hell are you to judge me on my performance? Runway is something similar. You sway your hips while walking, and by the end, you pose multiple times. But, like, how's the person supposed to tell how they're doing it better than the opponent? How does someone walk better than the other? According to the game, I had the better hip sway, all thanks to my I just shit my pants walk. But what about the posing at the end? How does the game tell, like, who's posing better? Is it the placement of the Joy-Con, moving it far from one spot to another? Is it all about if you're holding still in said pose? If I were to make my Joy-Con perfectly still, how would it calculate that? You're starting to see the issue here? I think the worst of it was dance-off. I just feel like the calculation system is too abstract to really feel like I'm winning or losing. Copy dance is the only one of these that I think kind of works. One person poses, and you try to copy their exact pose. It's still a little abstract, but I can better accept that I just didn't do a good job copying my opponent if I lose. I have a better sense of what I might have done wrong compared to the other ones. Moving back to some ones I like, I think the ones that heavily focus on HD rumble are pretty good. I think the one where you have to crack the vault is pretty enjoyable. Slowly tilt the Joy-Con until you feel a slight rumble that resembles a click, and then you hold it in place to unlock the vault. Very simple. There's another one where you need to find out how many marbles are in a Joy-Con. It's genuinely impressive how it feels like there's actual marbles inside that thing. I always loved the HD rumble of the Joy-Cons. I think they're very underutilized. I remember when I was playing Stardew Valley, I was riding my horse, and once I got onto the pavement, the rumble was in the beat of the horse galloping. I was genuinely impressed. I also think the more simplistic games work best with the idea of not needing to look at the screen. Like Quick Draw, you react to the guy saying fire. Telephone, you react to the phone ringing. Wait, isn't that just the same thing? Fake Draw, where you react to the guy saying fire. That's literally the same thing. The only difference in this one is that the guy sometimes says another word to throw you off. Aside from that, it's literally the same game. There's only 28 of these games, by the way, and these two are counted as different games. Sorry, I went back to complaining. Let's see, something positive. Some of the game's concepts are pretty out there. There's one where you play as a gorilla trying to attract a mate by beating your chest to the rhythm the game provides. There's another one where you have to milk a cow while looking directly into your opponent's eye. Look into their eyes as you squeeze fresh milk from that tit. Some of them are a little confusing though. Like there's this one where you have to rotate the controller. If you tilt it to the sides too much, you'll lose points. The whole idea is to get more points than your opponents, but if both of you don't have Parkinson's, then you just have to look at how much your opponent did and then one-up them. I think Wizard has a similar problem. You both point your Joy-Cons at each other and thrust towards your opponent. However, if you thrust and your opponent immediately thrusts back, they counter greatly. It ultimately leads to a game where you just wait for your opponent to thrust and then thrust back each and every time. And if you both know to do that, well, be expected to sit there for a while. It's like in Mario Party Jamboree with that slapping duel minigame, where the best strategy is just not to attack and let your opponent attack themselves. There's this one where you have to eat a sandwich, only one to use the IR sensor, by the way. And once one person finishes, instead of like handing the Joy-Con off to someone else for their turn, the game just ends. You have to remember your score, restart the game, and then give it to your opponent to see how much they get. It's so odd. It almost makes it feel unfinished. Like the developers just never got around to programming the results screen. There's another one like that where you have to shake a champagne bottle, and whoever's holding it when the pop goes off loses. This one makes a little bit more sense to me. There's no way for the game to be able to tell who's holding the controller or how many people are playing, so you kind of have to do this sort of elimination thing yourselves. I still think there should be like an in-game indicator of something though, like pick the amount of players who are participating, and when one person gets out, the game auto resets showing that there's only 3 people left. I know that like this is such a nothing complaint, but like I don't know, it's just the way it feels. It's not satisfying when the game just stops. Okay, so that's all the games individually. And while you can just play them by selecting them by themselves, there's multiple game modes that you can play that structure the minigames in a more larger experience. The first mode is called Team Battle. You can play up to 20 people according to the game. You separate into 2 teams, and then you pick one person to go first, where they play one of the games that is provided. If one team wins, they get to spin a wheel. That allows them to move across the board. The game they land on is the next game everyone gets to play. You keep switching people out, letting everyone take turns, until one team gets to the end and win. It's simplistic, but it works. There's actually some elements here included that I really like that allows the team falling behind to better catch up without feeling like bullshit. Okay, one of the elements isn't bullshit. The other one is totally bullshit, but it's the fun kind of bullshit. The first is that if one game has already been played, it can't be played again and no longer counts as a space on the board. So if you're behind and you roll a 5 and 2 games ahead of you have already been played, they won't count as a space and you just skip right over them, meaning that you actually get to move 7 spaces. I like that. The second is this spot on the wheel that kind of looks like a skull. If you land on it, it means the other team gets to spin instead. It's especially funny because it can also happen if you're very far behind, giving the people in first another boost that they really didn't need. It's super funny. The wheel also fills with them if you're at the very end, giving your opponents more chances to catch up. I really like this mode. It's simple, but I could definitely see it being a very fun time with a nice group of friends or family. I didn't get to play it on a large scale. I only got to play with my mom, but still, it was fun. Okay, now to the next mode. You fool! There is no other mode! This was the only one! There's technically Shuffle, but that just picks a game at random if you can't decide. So your 2 options when playing this game is either Team Battle or just picking the games individually. Riveting. And, I'm gonna be honest, that's the whole game. That's all there is to it. I knew this game was gonna be somewhat underwhelming because, like, you know, everyone said that at the time, but even then, I wasn't expecting it to be this bare bones. They're so brittle. 28 games, that's all there is to it. Many of which that I actually did not end up liking that much. Just one game mode, which is a fun way to play the game, but even then, it's the only mode. Even this would get stale with a group of people rather quickly. All this for $50. After playing it, I'm convinced that this was planned to be a pack-in game, but Nintendo decided against it at the last minute. I have no evidence of this, but I'm gonna believe it anyway. That's never steered me wrong before. It was certainly interesting to play this game for the first time, after it just kind of existed in the background for all these years, but after playing it, I can definitely see why it was just existing in the background for all these years. It's a fun distraction at best and kind of dull experience at worst. Don't spend $50 on this game. You can use that money to buy things more worth it, like a better game. Or heroin.